Welcome to Tell Us a Story, the podcast dedicated to the stories that connect us through our shared life experiences, as well as the stories that reveal the sometimes stark differences. Only by truly listening to one another can we bridge the gaps that divide us, fostering empathy, respect, and kindness with one another. From a young age, Darcy Maier dreamed of participating in the Peace Corps. Finally, in her mid-60s, the opportunity presented itself, and she became a Peace Corps volunteer. So listen as Darcy shares her story from her current home in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia.
So, my name is Darcy, and I am a Peace Corps volunteer currently serving in Mongolia. And I guess my story is a little bit interesting. I am almost 66 years old. So Peace Corps just recently, last week, celebrated its birthday. It was started sending volunteers out across the world in 1961. I am older than Peace Corps. So I remember being a very small child. John F. Kennedy was president. Peace Corps was everywhere. People were so excited about the idea of young people going out into the world and working with people of different countries and teaching them or helping them. Peace Corps has always only been sent to countries that asked for it. So that, I think, is also a really interesting thing about Peace Corps, is that Peace Corps volunteers go where they're invited. But anyway, back to when I was a child. It was all over TV. People were talking about it. There was such a sense of excitement in the 60s about Peace Corps. And when I was 10 years old, so that this would have been in 1968, I had a cousin who was quite a bit older than me. Her name was Barbara, and she joined the Peace Corps. And so somebody in my family was actually going, and she went to Iran, and she spent 2 years there teaching English. And we would get letters from her occasionally. And it was just sounded like such an incredible experience. When she came back in 1970, we were lucky enough, my family was lucky enough to go to the airport and pick her up from the plane. And then she actually stayed with us for several weeks afterwards while she was reacclimated to the United States. And I was just in so much awe, and I was just thinking, oh, when I grow up, this is what I want to do. I want to have this kind of exciting life. Fast forward to college, and I hadn't forgotten this dream. I was thinking, and people would ask me what I wanted to do when I was done with college, or what I wanted to be when I grew up. I would generally say, I want to go into the Peace Corps. This is what I want to do. I remember being in a class as a senior and the professor talking to us about our plans. And I said, oh, I'm going to go join the Peace Corps. And his response to me was, well, maybe you should get some actual skills before you try to join the Peace Corps. Maybe you should go and get a graduate degree first, and then you'll really have something to offer to the Peace Corps. And I thought about that, and in a sense, it did make sense. Peace Corps was very competitive. Thousands and thousands of young people were applying to join Peace Corps every year. 10,000, they would get 10,000 applicants for maybe a couple of thousand positions. And so in a way, his advice made sense. And so I went to graduate school. And by the time I got out of graduate school, I had met the man who would become the father of my first child, and things went on, and I figured that I better probably support my family. So 30 years went past, maybe more. No, it was about 30 years. And I never, ever forgot that I wanted to join Peace Corps, but it became a regret in the back of my mind. Oh, I wish that I had taken the chance when I had it. Well, so I was in my 60s and my children were grown up, and I had pretty much finished my responsibilities as a mother, and things fell into place, and I suddenly realized that I was able to make decisions for myself, that I could do something just because I wanted to do it. And the first thing that popped into my head was, I want to go into Peace Corps. And so I applied, and it was a very long process. And this was also during COVID. And so all of the Peace Corps volunteers were actually sent home. They were evacuated from all over the world. So there were no Peace Corps volunteers anywhere. Again, during this application process, I just wasn't sure if it would actually ever happen. They were definitely talking to me, definitely interested, but the message was, we have no idea when you're going or where you're going or if you will go. Again, I sort of put it on the back burner, went on with just living my regular life, and then got a letter, or an email, I guess it was, saying, hey, we have an opening in Mongolia. Are you interested? And my first thought was, I know nothing about Mongolia. I have no idea what to expect in a country like that. I did a little bit of research, and what I found online was pictures of very deep snow, people living in yurts out in the middle of the country, surrounded by cows and sheep and goats. And I took a deep breath and said, yes, I will go to Mongolia, fully expecting to live in what they don't call them yurts, they're called gers, but a felt home that you can pick up and move when you need to move, and to be in a little tiny community surrounded by other gers, and had no idea what to expect. My daughter, Adrian, who is my oldest, she established herself as being an adventurer at a very young age. When she was done with college, she joined the Peace Corps and went to Mozambique. And so I sort of lived vicariously at that time through her, and she would tell me about her adventures in Africa and living in a mud hut in a community and teaching in school. And so I sort of had this idea that joining Peace Corps meant I would live an isolated life out in the country, not really having any contact with Americans or foreigners. When I moved to Mongolia, I was very surprised. We came to the capital city of Ulaanbaatar, and it is a city of over 1 million people. I live in an apartment that is 8 stories high, and I have constant internet, constant electricity, heat. I live a pretty modern lifestyle, and you go out in the streets and it's full of traffic. It's a lot like my feeling of walking in New York. The traffic is terrible, and it's hard to cross the street, and it's very noisy, and there's cars, there's horns honking all the time. So it feels like a very modern city in a lot of ways. But Mongolia has a very interesting history. It was communist. It was actually controlled by the Soviet Union until the Soviet Union broke apart in the early 1990s. And when Mongolia established its first democratic government, one of the first things they did was contact Peace Corps and request volunteers to come and teach their people English. They have a very strong drive in this country to be fully what we call developed and fully part of the Western world, the Western economy. They want to be a successful nation, recognized as a world partner. And so one of their goals is to have all of their citizens be fluent in English by the year 2050. So I spent my time in Mongolia mostly teaching at a secondary school. It's a public school. The population of Mongolia is extremely young. I think 75%, at least 75% of the people are under the age of 30. At least 30% of the population is under the age of 14. So working in schools is really the best way to try to reach as many people as possible to teach them English. So the volunteers that are currently here are all placed in public schools. We work a lot with the students, teaching students, but we also work a lot with the teachers because most of the teachers here are not well trained in their own English skills. So we spend a lot of time just working with teachers and teaching them how to speak English better so that they can help their students. One of the things that we find in the classrooms is really what they want to practice is their speaking. They're pretty good with grammar, they're pretty good with vocabulary, but they aren't really good at knowing how to put sentences together, how to speak English clearly. So we spend I actually teach a whole class just on pronunciation, which I think is very helpful. The Mongolian language is very difficult and sounds very, very different than the sounds that we use in English. So it's difficult for them to learn how to speak clearly. On the other hand, this very small children have access to internet and they spend their days watching cartoons and YouTube videos of English. And so it's not unusual to meet young children who speak English very, very well without anything that we would consider to be an accent and very clearly. In fact, I have one young friend, she is 9 years old, who I spend a fair amount of time with. And she tells me that she speaks English better than she speaks Mongolian. And in fact, once I was hanging out with her and her mom suddenly turned and looked at her and said, "Why is your Mongolian so bad?" Which really made me laugh. Some of the other things that I do are I teach English classes in the community. But that's not the most exciting part of what I do. What I really like is to be involved with people and learn about the culture here. So when John F. Kennedy talked about establishing the Peace Corps, he described it as being an organization that is all about building world peace and friendship. And this idea of building world peace and friendship has not changed in the 62 or 63 years that Peace Corps has been in existence. That is really what we're all about, is meeting the people, establishing intercultural relationships. And one of the things that I really wanted in my life, when I would think about traveling, I would think about not really just wanting to go on a tour and seeing different countries. I wanted to really experience them. And in my life, I've not really had the opportunity to travel a lot. So joining Peace Corps, one of the things that was really attractive to me was being able to immerse myself in another culture and really get to know the people. And that is what I really enjoy and appreciate about my life in Peace Corps, is that I am here living by myself in an apartment, expected to go into the Mongolian world on a daily basis, work with people who are Mongolian and become friends with them, know their families, and just be part of their lives. And the other part of what I really enjoy is talking to my friends in America about what I do here and introducing them to the idea that the experience that you can get in Peace Corps is actually available to anybody. You can truly learn about another culture by living in that culture. That is the most valuable part of what I'm doing here for myself, is learning about Mongolia, but then also being able to teach people in America about Mongolia as well, because it's not a culture that we know a lot about. It's completely foreign to us. We don't even think about Mongolia. I certainly never did before I came here. I remember when I was a child talking about it being a very isolated place. Who would ever want to go to Mongolia? You know, we kind of had this reputation of being a place like Siberia that, you know, you would only go to if you absolutely had to, and why would anybody want to travel there? But in reality, it's a place with a history of thousands and thousands of years. You know, the culture of nomadic herds people who are working with animals and not having permanent homes, even in the deepest midwinter. These people follow their herds, and they don't own land the way that we own land. That when you get out of the city, the land is just there. It's not they don't have the same concept that we do of having to have a ranch or a farm, fences. You don't see fences, even if you have a piece of land that you think of as your own. Your sheep, your cows, your horses are not confined. They are free to wander, and they do. Especially in the winter when the weather gets very, very cold and the animals go looking for food, and they can go hundreds, maybe that's an exaggeration, but they can go, 60, 70 kilometers away from their homes just to find food. And it's a hard life for the people who live in the countryside. This winter has been particularly cold. We've had weeks where the temperatures have stayed minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and animals die. And the herds people really struggle with through the winter. It's not an easy lifestyle, but they also don't want to change it. They love what they do, and I've had the opportunity to stay for a week in a Gare with a family, and just watching them work and loving their lives. And this was just what they did. And it was just such an opportunity to really learn how to live subsistence living, because that's what they do. Their animals are their livelihood. They use every bit, everything that they use comes from the animals. Everything that they do has to do with the animals. And it's a valuable lesson for me to learn as an American. So looking back now and thinking about that advice that my professor gave me about I should have actually some skills before I go into Peace Corps, when I was in my 40s, 30s and 50s, and thinking, oh, I wish I'd joined Peace Corps, I really resented that advice that he gave me. I told people when I would talk about Peace Corps, I said, yeah, I got really bad advice from my professor. Now that I am in my 60s and I am here in the Peace Corps, I actually am grateful that I didn't go into Peace Corps when I was in my 20s, because I do feel like I have so much more to offer to Peace Corps, just in the sense of maturity, and I guess wisdom would be the right word to say. I feel like I do have skills to offer. I do have a lot more patience now than I did when I was in my 20s. So when I'm teaching a class and the kids are rowdy, and I really feel like, oh, are they getting it? And I'm kind of ready to tear my hair out. But then I feel like I can step back from that situation. And I feel like a lot of my friends who are in their 20s aren't really able to step back from that situation, where I look at these children and I see them in 20 or 30 years, and I'm not sure that my 20-year-old friends are really able to do that as well as I can. When you go into the Peace Corps, the first 3 months are actually spent in learning the language and learning the skills of the job that you're going to need. So Mongolian volunteers spend a lot of time in their first 3 months actually learning teaching skills. We are taught things like how to plan a lesson, how to work with the teachers to develop teaching methodologies and teaching skills. And never having been a teacher, I spent a lot of the first 3 months complaining to my trainers that I'm not a teacher. Why are you trying to teach me how to be a teacher? I don't want to be a teacher. When I finished my training and I was out in the community, I think one of the things that's also surprised me about being a Peace Corps volunteer is that I teach all the time. When I'm in the classroom, I am learning as much as I'm teaching. My teachers are my partners in the classroom. I don't teach by myself. I always teach with another teacher. And so I am always learning from the teachers, and I'm always learning from the students. Although they call me teacher, I don't necessarily feel like that's what I'm doing, despite the fact that I'm giving them grammar lessons and having fun with them and putting words on the board and teaching them vocabulary and helping them with their speaking skills. But I feel more like it's a partnership even when I'm in the classroom and they're calling me teacher, that everywhere I go, it's more of a, what can I learn from you? How can we partner together? How can we benefit from our relationship in ways that I don't really think about when I'm in America? One of the things that they tell us in Peace Corps when we first join is that we will be changed. We will be different people when we come back. And that is most definitely true. As I mentioned before, I haven't spent a lot of my life traveling. I haven't had the opportunity to really travel outside of the United States ever in my life. So this has been truly an opportunity for me to be out in the world and to discover what different cultures are like, how people see the world so differently than anything that I've ever experienced in America. And so, yes, I'm going to come back a changed person. I will have so much more appreciation for the different perspectives that people have. And I realize that I'm only getting the Mongolian perspective, but now I understand that people all over the world, they have the same values as we do, and they have completely different values than we do. They have the same customs as we do. They have the same wishes and aspirations as Americans do, and they're completely different than anything that we can imagine. One example is the way that families are expected to interact. Families in Mongolia are multi-generational. They really don't have daycare like we do in America. They start their education very early. Children ages 3 and 4 are actually going to kindergarten, but the expectation is that families pull together and help each other out to raise their children. Oftentimes, especially here in UB, parents are working long, long hours, and sometimes if their families don't live here in Ulaanbaatar with them, they will send their children out into the countryside or out to where their extended families are to be raised by another generation. So children are very, very much aware of their families and who their grandparents are, who their cousins are, because that is oftentimes who raises them. And then when they get older, they come back to Ulaanbaatar to go to school to continue their education in the city. The other thing about families is that the older children are responsible for the younger children. You don't see here in UB, you just don't see the sibling rivalry that we expect in America. The older children help to raise their younger brothers and sisters. They are told, you are the oldest, you are responsible for your baby brother or your baby sister. And they take that responsibility very, very seriously. You see siblings walking through UB holding hands because the older child is responsible for getting the younger child to where they need to be. There is very much a sense of pride in your family. And they have in Mongolia this idea that you're stronger as a family unit than you are as an individual. And I think that's something that we don't have so much in America, where we have a much more individualistic perspective that I am responsible for myself. I will succeed by myself. In Mongolia, there's more of a sense, especially for the young people, that you're stronger as a family. I am so grateful for the opportunities that I've had throughout my whole life. But the Peace Corps was something that I always wanted to do, and I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to do this. And I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to do something that I feel really does make a difference in the world, and I certainly feel like I make a difference in the people's lives that I touch here. And I don't know, it's an opportunity that I would certainly tell anybody who's even considering it that it is well worth looking into, and that everybody should have an experience like Peace Corps, because it just opens up the world to you in ways that I don't think other things do.
Thank you for listening to Darcy's story. See the show notes for a link to Darcy's blog and for more information about the Peace Corps. You will also find more information about this podcast in the show notes, or visit us at tellusastory.info.